Solutions team being 965 to 990 Great North Road, using the site selection criteria that was approved by the governing body. 27 Normanby Road was found to not be...
Could you slow down just a little bit? I'm finding it quite hard to follow.
Sorry, apologies for that. 27 Normanby Road was not found to be a suitable site due to financial viability, incompatibility with surrounding land uses and planning issues. The Great North Road site was found to be a suitable site for a community recycling centre. However, the Albert Eden Local Board subsequently advised the Waste Solutions team and ACPL in March that it is no longer available as the board wished to use it for an alternative use. ACPL and the Waste Solutions team remain of the view that the site would be a suitable site for a community recycling centre. Another comprehensive search of the council property portfolio has been undertaken, but no other possible sites for a central community recycling centre have been identified specifically in the central area. There is ample land outside of this area in the council property portfolio. Some potentially suitable sites were investigated, but were ultimately ruled out due to the sites being designated for the CRL and not being available for a reasonable tenure due to this. Given no other suitable sites other than the Great North Road site are available in the central area in Council's property portfolio, the Waste Solutions team have commenced investigating a potential alternative strategy for implementing the resource recovery network in the central area. This work is in its infancy, but some potential sites, including some in Council's property portfolio, have been identified just outside the central area that we were initially investigating. Subsequent to this work and the work that's taken place to date, looking for suitable sites for a community recycling centre and investigating 27 Normanby Road, Auckland Transport identified the need to rehouse a Mount Eden church which has been displaced by the construction of the CRL. Rehousing this church is required as part of the Public Works Act mandated compensation package. 27 Normanby Road has been identified as a suitable site, and the church in question are supportive of being relocated to this site. Auckland Council, as the acquiring authority, has obligations to rehouse landowners displaced by the CRL, and we are seeking to use 27 Normanby Road to do this. Auckland Transport urgently need to confirm that the church can be rehoused at this site in line with the wider council group's obligations under the Public Works Act. Auckland Transport have also indicated that of the options they have considered, this was the most cost-effective option available. ACPL's view in this is that we, as this governing body is well aware, initially sought to use 27 Normanby Road for an intensified housing development, the sort of exemplar housing development that's set out in the Auckland Plan. However, in the interest of progressing wider council objectives, we support it currently being used to rehouse the church in Mount Eden who will be displaced by the construction of the CRL. In the interest of helping the Waste Solutions team find a suitable option or suitable sites for community recycling facilities in the central area, ACPL are recommending that partial proceeds of sale from 27 Normanby Road be retained for a central community recycling facility. At this stage, we are not proposing an exact amount of how much be retained to allow the Waste Solutions team time to establish an alternative strategy for the central area and identify what exactly it needs to facilitate this. We are recommending that this be delegated to the Board of Development Auckland, which ACPL is becoming from the end of this year, end of this month, and Council CFO for exact monetary figures to be established. ACPL's acquisitions team have undertaken a high-level desktop analysis of property in the 3 local board areas for a full waste processing facility and outside of the original area of the 3 local boards that was looked at. The focus has been on identifying possible sites for a waste processing facility at this stage. Smaller drop-off points, which will be easier to find and cheaper to acquire, will be looked at in the future, but our focus at this point in time has been finding a suitable site for a full waste processing facility. We have identified potential sites, and a full assessment will be undertaken and budget will need to be available before we can have a concrete view on the possible price of these sites.
in Adelaide.
The other items on this agenda are all relatively small, or included in this report, are all relatively small properties. They're of relatively low value, and there is a view for all of them that they be sold to adjoining landowners.
Happy to move the recommendation, Mr. Chair.
Happy to second.
We could ask questions, or we want Shale and Peter. Would you like to speak now? Yeah, come on up. Stay there, Letitia, Marion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning again, councillors. This is the third time that local boards have been before you, in the 3 affected local boards, to have a policy debate within a disposal financial discussion. We're very grateful to officers for putting the recommendation before you today in the interest of finding a way forward. This council adopted, its waste minimisation plan in 2012. We've been through a 10-year process, budget process, and within that, what's provided for in that plan has not been provided for in our 10-year budget cycle, and that is finding a place for a central recycling centre to complete the network that is available and being implemented around the region. It's part of the low carbon objectives of council. It's part of the waste minimisation plan. What we've come up constantly against in the discussions, where we endeavour to come before you to have the discussion about Normanby Road site, which, and I don't want to contradict council officers because they've put it pretty well to you, but contrary to that, the local boards, the 3 local boards, Waitemata, Puketapapa and Albert Eden, commissioned this report on finding an appropriate site for the recycle centre. Normanby Road was identified as absolutely on the button, on the money in terms of the appropriate site. What we've always faced, and what ACPL have correctly put to you, or Auckland Development now, or shortly, is that the wider view, when you give a mandate to the CCO for disposal of assets, is the economic value, the maximisation of the economic value of the sites. What the central areas of Auckland face is the land value is significantly higher than the rest of Auckland. A recycle centre will never cut it in terms of best economic and financial use of land in the central area. And we've heard no appropriate sites have been identified. Normanby's perfect, absolutely perfect in everything except the sale proceeds have a higher economic value to the council than a recycling centre. On that basis, we would never be able to implement centrally the waste minimisation plan and completing the recycling network within Auckland. And that will be the issue we face. So we're grateful for council officers really stretching their mandate, because they are, and I appreciate that. We appreciate that collectively as the local boards, to really endeavour to fulfil the missing bit of council's plan, and that is to endeavour to ring fence, at the moment, an unquantified sum, and that's because we've been at chicken and egg for now 3 years, and the chicken and egg is there is no budget, therefore ACPL cannot go out and negotiate and secure a site. So until council allocates a budget, and this indirectly does so, or at least mandates the allocation of a budget, we will never get there. So we still want Normanby. Normanby is the ideal site for a recycling centre. But we accept the economic reality that its economic value is higher as sale proceeds. We're sort of into the SOE sell-off sort of debate indirectly, But so I just ask councillors to support the resolution if they're not minded to give Normanby. We accept, its economic value is higher, But I do question, in the context of what I've just said about best economic value, whether delegation to Auckland Development is the right thing. I would have thought delegation to the Chief Executive to make that decision on behalf of the wider policy mandate would be the appropriate thing. Again, we're getting into the conflict between the mandate that ACPL have to maximise the sale proceeds, and you're building in a conflict there. And I know the Chief Executive is big enough to sort it out with the CCO, but I would have thought Council should sort its policy out and what's wrong with delegating to the Chief Executive.
Thank you, Sharon. Peter.
No, I'm sorry. I think that Shale's just done a splendid job of isolating the key issues as far as we're concerned. I'll just support him on that.
All right, questions. Councillor Walker.
Mine really isn't a question, Mr. Chair, so I'll reserve the right to speak.
Okay. Councillor Casey.
Yeah, it seems to me, in my quiet way, it must be easier to relocate a church than it is to relocate a resource recovery centre. So my question to officers is, could you tell us about the alternative sites that you've looked at for the relocation of the Mount Eden Church?
Can I just call on staff from Auckland Transport and the Waste Solutions team to join me before answering that?
Yep. So we have Rick and Ian, is it?
Ian Supple from the Waste Solutions.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you.
And this is Rick Galley from Auckland Transport.
Auckland Transport, yep. I see Life Church is here today also. We've been working with all the landowners affected by the CRL to compensate them in relation to their Public Works Act rights. As a part of the negotiation with Life Church, it's been a constructive process. We've have observed 3 rounds of site searches for them within an effective radius, and that radius would be a radius where their community can access the services that they provide to the community. That was undertaken by Barfoot's. There were 3 rounds of those reports, and it identified a number of sites that ranged, we kept enlarging that radius to get to sites that were got to a point where they were no longer actually feasible for a community to still access, in the way that they access today, and where we've come to appreciate these are people that walk to the facilities, their students, their families, and it's quite a large community. The sites that we have found, we didn't bring those reports with us today, but it was everything that was available in the market at the time, and it was also Barfoot's going door to door, knocking on people's doors that might be interested in selling. There's an ever-reducing quantity of the important feature, which is a large, within their existing facility, a large warehouse that was converted for the actual auditorium. So the real challenge in this is finding a site that has the carrying capacity for that same large former warehouse, or where one could actually be built. So the site constraints, getting the traffic connections. Their existing site actually has much better traffic access than the proposed site, so there's some benefits and disadvantages in the sites. We did narrow, I think, to 4 or 5 sites. Right? We narrowed to about 4 or 5 sites. We undertook independent planning assessment on the carrying capacity of those sites. Of the sites, only one of the sites was actually within council ownership, and that was the Normanby site. The site next door, which is formerly the BIC New Zealand site, we also looked at, and that was coming at about a $5 million premium at the time in the market to the Normanby site. So we talked about the most economic option at the time, and the sites that were available, the Normanby site was the most cost-effective because it has the former buildings that don't carry a lot of value to them. So we're really looking at Normanby site as more of a redevelopment land value. The other sites were still privately owned, and we had, in terms of the Public Works Act processes, we wouldn't have any powers to compel people to sell in the open market, which meant that trying to negotiate with private landowners to aggregate get perhaps a warehouse and a bit of space for office or parking or access was going to create a scale or cost to help find a solution. And so I say after 3 rounds, the Normanby site has remained the most accessible and within the time frame to actually implement a move to allow the construction of the project within the viable funding window that we're working in. It remains the only site.
Thank you, Rick.
It's probably a question through the chair. When there is one site with two specified uses, both optimal uses for the site, whose decision is it that Auckland Transport's priorities are above the priorities of finding a local resource recovery centre for the local boats?
Through you, Mr. Chair. There's a couple of issues here. First of all, the site selection criteria that was endorsed by the governing body found that 27 Normanby Road isn't a suitable site for a community recycling centre, not just for financial reasons, but on the basis of planning considerations. It's across the road from residential housing, there's a school over the back, and it's very near eateries. Now, the advice from Council's planning team is that it would be very, very difficult to get consent for waste processing activities to take place at this site. Now, I'm aware that a business case was done in respect of 27 Normanby Road, but this was an operational business case. I believe Ian Stapple can provide a bit more information on that, but it was an operational business case, so it wasn't looking at surrounding land uses, it wasn't looking at underlying value of the land, etc. It was purely looking at could a resource recovery centre operate on this site. Now, also, we're not trying to advocate that one use has greater importance than the other, but we are mindful of the fact that Council has obligations under the Public Works Act to compensate landowners affected by public works. And Rick, you may be able to speak a bit more about Council's obligations under the Public Works Act in this instance.
If I could respond to the comment about one priority versus another, it's never been our position that one is more important. It's always been our position over the last several years that we've wanted to get next in line. So it was always our view that if the public work that was envisaged for this site was not to proceed, we simply wanted to get next in line. So we've never seen this as a trade-off between the two. If the decision here was to actually to go ahead and undertake this work on this site, then we would have the unenviable position of having to go find another site, and that's it. So it's not our view that one's more important than the other.
But in effect, the Mount Eden Church will get a site within, as you said, the circles of the page sheds, whereas the local resource recovery centre for the Central Isthmus could end up in Pukekohe. No disrespect to Pukekohe.
Through the chair, we're looking at central area sites. We've actually identified some in the Onehunga area, so just outside the area that we were looking at, which are actually in Council's property portfolio that could easily be used, and they're very, very suitable for this purpose. They're on industrial land, very, very close to motorway access. There's for Puketapapa residents, there's the off-ramp for the southwestern motorway. For more central residents, there's the off-ramp from the southern motorway. These are sites that have to remain in council ownership because there's contamination issues, but because there's contamination issues, it actually means they're very, very suitable for using as a resource recovery centre. Ian may be able to speak a bit more about the alternative strategy that the Waste Solutions team is very much in the early stages of planning at the moment, but initial analysis that ACPL have undertaken for the Waste Solutions team of potential sites have found several potential sites just outside of the area that we were originally looking at, which would be very, very suitable and don't face any of the constraints that the 27 Normanby Road face with planning issues, and also because they're industrial land, the underlying land value isn't the same as what it would be if it's in the central area. As I'm sure the governing body appreciates, anything in the central area is, as Shale mentioned, exorbitantly expensive. It's also, if it's been zoned for townhouses or apartments under the unitary plan, the costs are rising pretty much by the day. So there's the underlying value of the land in the central area is incredibly expensive. Looking just outside the central area, there's several ideal sites, many of which are in council's property portfolio, which are available.